My name is Amaya Mosley.
My name is Ezine Wankwell.
I'm an associate professor of anthropology and communication at the University of Pennsylvania, which means I'm in the Department of Anthropology and in the Annenberg School for Communication. I mean, I was an undergraduate at Howard University planning to be a filmmaker. You know, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, went to school around the corner from 40 Acres and a Mule Film Work. I knew what my life's work was. It was to make stories in film, in images and sound. And I spent the first basically 3 years at Howard very single-mindedly doing that. If there is a field that's wide open enough that even if I don't quite know what I want to do, when I figure it out, I can call it anthropology, and they'll allow me to continue to make movies and to theorize in images and sound, that's the place I want to be. And so I decided to do that, and instead of doing what a lot of my friends did at Howard, which was go to LA or New York and start making movies. And so that's how I got into it. I thought it's a big enough tent that I can do what I want to do. I enjoyed writing. I enjoyed learning about cultural differences. I thought this might be a cool way to do it. And begin to develop a skill set as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, that I didn't really have yet, right? I was a small kid from a small town in New York City, right, Brooklyn, right? And kind of felt like my world was too tiny. And so if I wanted to tell stories, I needed to know more about the planet. And so very naively, I said, anthropology helped me do that. I practice anthropology by being a kind of critical citizen of the 21st century. Right? I mean, it's looking at the stuff I see every day, just turning it over a little bit, turning it around, trying to imagine it differently, right? And for me, it's about not making a distinction, a kind of often arbitrary distinction between the field and back home, right? I mean, I only got into anthropology because I wanted to turn back home into the field, right? I wanted to interrogate the stuff I took for granted. So it just means being very self-conscious and purposeful about the ways in which you interact and the kind of world your everyday machinations help to unfurl and develop. And so for me, practicing ethnography is about bringing a very critical, sort of relativist sensibility to bear on all the various ways I interact with people in the world. The idea of popular culture has a sort of twofold valence. One, it's about saying there are things that people take for granted every day, that are popular, that are ubiquitous, that demand critical reading, right? So just because it seems like, well, this stuff is frivolous, doesn't mean that an anthropologist would bring a frivolous sensibility to bear on it, right? You can still look at it very carefully and critically and read it deeply, right? And so if you're not seeing anything there, my argument is because you're not looking closely enough, right? No cultural product is as superficial as some people would imagine it is. It always has depth to it. And the key is, can you be careful enough, can you be judicious enough to see it, right? And if you can't, it's on you. It's not on the product, right? So don't blame NBC, don't blame CBS. Now, it might not be a positive representation. That's a whole different category. But it demands interrogation because it has productive force, right? It does stuff in the world. Well, I clearly am invested in taking seriously the significance of blackness, right, in all the various ways we might imagine that manifests itself in the world. I mean, I guess my point in at least the second book project is to say I can understand why a lot of people have made their academic careers on deconstructing essentialized notions of race and identity, right? So everyone does a very good job showing us that sometimes we think about blackness in ways that imprison ourselves and other people, right? And I want to say I get it. And I recognize that there could be something very dangerous about authenticity tests we use for any community. I just want to say that's not all blackness represents. And if you reduce it to a kind of prison house, if you reduce it to a jail cell, you don't understand why it's such an important part of a lot of people's sense of who and what they are and how they relate to other people. I want to say, no, race is even more real once we've deconstructed it to death, because now it haunts us as a kind of zombie, right, a kind of Frankensteinian figure. And we forget we produced it, we can't even control it anymore, but now we can't even kill it because we already killed it. So now what? What are you going to do? I want to say what you're going to do is figure out how to deal with what the effects of all of that stuff, all of this history, all these really incredible forms of institutionalized discrimination and racism, what the effects of some of that stuff mean for the kinds of interactions that are possible in the present and the sorts of worlds we want to create in the future. But that doesn't mean getting past race. It doesn't mean getting post-racial. It means finding a way to use some of that history to imagine different versions of racialized community. And that, for me, is about sort of it's what blackness stands in for, right? It stands in for an attempt to say this is something we are invested in and that we will deploy, but we will deploy it in a way that is uplifting, that is empowering, and that will counteract some of the destructive ways in which it's been mobilized in the past, right? We're not just going to throw out the baby with the bathwater.